Aeneid, Book 1. Virgil begins by explaining that he is telling the story of Aeneas, who, after being exiled from Troy, came to Italy through much difficulty as a result of the god's cruelty, mainly that of Juno. Virgil tells how Aeneas was destined to arrive at Latium and start the Latin race. Virgil then questions the muse about what Aeneas could have done to anger Juno in such a way, and then begins his story. Juno's favorite city was Carthage, which she one day hoped would rule the world. However, it was fated that Carthage would one day be defeated by a new race that would spring from Trojan blood. Therefore, she was determined to make it impossible for Trojans to reach Latium. In addition to this, Juno's hatred for Carthage was increased by Paris, who chose Venus over her. Juno recalls the time when Minerva burned the aggrieved fleet out of anger and wonders why she shouldn't do the same. Consequently, Juno went to Aeolia, where the wind god Aeolus kept the winds contained under a mountain, and asked him to set out his winds to sink the Trojan ships, promising that if he did, she would give him her fairest nymph for a wife. Aeolus quickly agrees and sends out the east, west, and southwest winds on the Trojans. When the unleashed winds hit the Trojan ships, all the sailors are frightened, and Aeneas expresses that he wished he could have died defending Troy rather than there at sea. While Aeneas was saying these things, the rest of his ships were being capsized, cast on the rocks, and run aground, and it looked as if all was lost. But then Neptune, seeing the destruction and recognizing that it was the work of his sister, ordered the winds to return to Aeolus and proclaimed that he was the only lord of the sea. After that, the ocean immediately became calm, and the sun came out of the clouds. The exhausted Trojans then take their remaining 7 ships and head for the coast of Libya, where there is a sheltered cove where they can take shelter. Once they arrive, they land on the beach and start a fire and crush their spoiled corn. Then Aeneas hikes to the top of a mountain to look for the rest of his ships, of which none are in sight. But while there, he spots a herd of stags and kills 7 of them with a bow and arrow. He then takes them back to his ships and divides them up among his men along with some wine. Afterwards, Aeneas gave a motivational speech to his men, reminding them of the perils they have already been through and how they are going to be successful and continue on to Latium, where they are fated to have a good life. Although Aeneas himself is very worried and is doubtful about what he is saying to his men. Jupiter and Venus watch Aeneas from the sky, and saddened by his struggles, Venus asks Jupiter when his suffering will end. Then Jupiter reveals that Aeneas will reach Italy and found Lavinium after a great battle against Italy, and then he will rule for 3 years, and then after his death ask Canis for 30 years. Then, after 300 years, Romulus will be born of a priestess and Mars, and he will found Rome, which will endure forever. Then Jupiter sends Mercury to Dido to ensure she is hospitable to the Trojans. Then Aeneas and Achates go into the woods and come upon Venus in disguise, and she tells them about Dido's past. Then Aeneas tells Venus of his difficult journey and his lost ships, but Venus tells him that all his lost ships safely arrived in Carthage. Then she revealed herself to them, and Aeneas reproached her and started to walk away towards Carthage, but she made them invisible by shrouding them in a thick cloud before she departed, so they could safely enter the city. As Aeneas went into Carthage, he was not seen by any because of the mist around him, and was amazed by its massive buildings, paved roads, and its workers who were building it up. He envied their happy people, or the happy people already living there, and compared them to busy bees in the summer. While in the city, Aeneas sees on the walls of the temple of Juno a description of the Trojan War and images of people like Priam and Achilles, which makes him happy to know the ordeals of his people are known throughout the world. Then Dido arrives at the temple, and Aeneas observes that she is very beautiful. Then Aeneas and Achates were astonished to see all the men they thought to have perished in the storm approach Dido. This filled them with joy and fear, but they remained hidden in their cloud in order to observe why their comrades were there. Aeneas listened to one of his men tell Dido who they were and of their misfortunes, and how they did not plan to invade her lands, but only to go on to settle in Italy and Latium. They tell her how they lost their brave leader, and ask to be able to repair their ships on her beach. To this, Dido tells Aeneas's men not to worry, and offered them a guarded escort to wherever they wished to go, or, if they pleased, she offered them to stay in her lands. She also said that she would help them search for Aeneas. Then the mist of invisibility left, and Aeneas and Achates was revealed. Venus had used her powers to make Aeneas very handsome and godlike in appearance. Then Aeneas addressed Dido and praised her, and she was amazed at his sudden appearance, and welcomed him and called for a grand feast for them. Then Aeneas sends Achates back to the ships to retrieve gifts for Dido. Venus, still concerned about Juno's wrath, and because of her mistrust for Carthaginian hospitality, she sends Cupid, disguised as Aeneas' son, Ascanius, to make Dido fall in love with Aeneas. Cupid brings gifts to the feast, sits in Dido's lap, and enchants her, making her forget her husband Sychaesus, and causes her to fall in love with Aeneas. The end.